It's a high-tech conversation.
And a low-tech topic.
Live on the World Wide Web via Zoom. Bench Talk 101.
Welcome to Bench Talk 101. Tonight we have Gordon McCall, who is going to be talking heat treating. So if you want to actually ask a question while Gordon's doing his presentation, please go to the reactions and lift your hand and we'll come to you as and when. And if you could mute when you're not actually speaking. Thank you. Over to you, Gordon.
All right. Well, today I thought I'd talk about heat treating tool steel in the home shop. I have equipment and stuff in my blacksmith shop that maybe not everybody would want to have because it's costly, and I have a forge is what I'm saying, and it's a larger size. I can put bigger things in there, but for you guys, if you wanted to make a small plane iron or a screwdriver or a small chisel or something, you don't need a big forge to do that. So I was gonna kind of talk about some of the stuff that I had when I started out and how to do it, and a little bit about tool steels. So I'm going to start with tool steel. There's multiple varieties, different, what do they call them? Different ingredients in the steel for different properties. And so I'll start with the simple tool steel is W1. And W means water hardening. So you dunk it and you quench it in water to harden it. And those are simple steels, simple carbon steels, they call them. And that would include like 1095. You've all heard files, for example, are made of 1095 steel. That's a simple carbon steel, doesn't have a lot of extra additives to it for any other properties. It's just W1 1095. What 1095 means is 10 is a simple tool steel, 95 is 0.95% carbon, and it's the carbon that allows the tool steels to harden when you quench them. There's also lower carbon steels like 1045, 1075, 1085, and I think in Europe there's a different system for those numbers. I think 1095 was like 71222 or something like that. I'm not familiar with the European names for the tool steel, so I apologize for that. But I'm just going by what I use here in the States. So W1 steel has a little bit of chrome, like 0.15% chromium and 0.25% manganese, and it's almost nothing. So moving on to O1 steel, which you've all heard of, and it's perfect for plane irons and home shops. It's a very forgiving tool steel. O1 means oil hardening. So you don't dunk it in water, you quench it in oil. It's the most forgiving of all the tool steels. It's the easiest to harden and temper and do all the stuff that you need to do to make a tool out of it. Where some of the more modern, complicated tool steels, I wouldn't recommend messing with them at all at home, because you need special ovens and temperature control and all that stuff. O1 is very forgiving. You can do it at home. So it's a perfect steel for guys like us. Let's see. I'm looking at my notes, so I apologize if I'm looking down. So O1 tool steel has about 0.94% carbon, which is similar to W1. It's got a higher amount of manganese in it, 1.2%, which is good for wear resistance. So that makes a good edge tool tool steel. And there's less distortion, supposedly less distortion with 01 than the next one, which is A2. I'll go back to the less distortion part. I made a set of floats and it distorted all over the place. So I don't know how true that is. I found it not to be the case, but A2 is another tool steel that you've probably heard of. It's A means air hardening, so you don't quench it in any fluids at all. You bring it up to what's called the critical temperature and you just let it cool in the air and it'll harden on its own. The advantage of that over 01 is that it will harden more than 01. It'll actually get harder. So your edge will be like a plain iron edge would retain better. But it's harder to sharpen because it's harder steel. And but it has better wear resistance than 01 also. And the carbon is about 1%, and it has a higher percentage of chrome. It's 5% chrome. This is give or take some. I just looked the recipes up online, and 5% chrome and 1% manganese. So it's tough. The chrome makes it really hard and wear resistant. And another one that you've probably heard of is high-speed steel, which is also a tool steel. But the difference is it has tungsten in it. And tungsten, if you know, melts at, I should have wrote this down, like 5,500 degrees Fahrenheit, which is extremely high. It's like twice as high as all the other steels. And so that gives it resistance to heat. So when you're turning on your lathe and you're using high-speed steel tools and they get hot, they won't lose their temper. Molybdenum, chrome, and tungsten in the high-speed steel. So that's basically the four that I'm going to cover. There's lots of other tool steels. There's so many it'll drive you crazy, but these four here are the ones that guys like us would come across the most. And I'm recommending 01. If you're going to make something from brand new steel, use 01 steel, and chances are you're going to be successful at getting a good hardened edge on the tool that you're making. So what I'm going to do is talk a little bit about how to use 01 steel, how to harden and temper and do all that stuff. If you're buying brand new stock from whatever supplier you have, and 01 steel, again, is probably called something different in Europe, and I apologize, I don't know what it's called there.
No, it's 01 over here.
Okay. All right, good.
It's often called gauge plate.
Gauge plate. Okay.
Gauge plate, yeah. So it's 01. Gauge plate is 01 steel that's been accurately ground to a particular thickness.
Oh, I got you. Yeah. And it's usually Blanchard ground, so it's accurately, perfectly dimensional. So when you buy new steel, it comes annealed, which means it's as soft as it possibly can get, so that you can drill it, you can file it, you shape it however you want. It's not hard. You can bend it. And that's an advantage because you don't have to, overusing like an old plain blade that's an old one. You'll have to fully anneal that before you do anything to it. Brand new steel, you don't have to do that. So that's good. So you shape your tool, whatever you're making. I made a stupid chisel out of, this is a file. I really probably shouldn't show this right now because this is not new steel. This is used steel, but you make something out of your new steel. And what you want to do is harden and temper it at that point. So what you have to do is heat it to what's called the critical temperature. And the critical temperature is where the steel will, because it's all magnetic, you can stick a magnet to it. But when it gets to a certain temperature, which is usually glowing a color red, orange, depending on the steel, it's all different. It'll get to a certain temperature where the magnet won't stick to it at all. Like it's not even magnetic at all. And that transition is called the critical temperature. And that is the temperature you want to be at, or just a little bit above. You don't want to be below it. You want to be just at it or just a little bit above before you quench an oil. And I use canola oil, rapeseed oil. There's other names for it, but it's cooking oil that you could use olive oil also. I like to eat that instead. So I use the canola oil. And it's cheap. But you heat it up to that critical temperature and you immediately dunk it into the oil and it'll bubble and sizzle. And if you have a larger piece like this, you can swirl it around. If you're making a knife or a plane blade that's kind of thin, you don't want to swirl it around because it'll warp it, believe it or not. Ask me how I know. And so once you do that, you just swirl it around until it's cooled off and then pull it out, wipe it off. At that point, that 01 steel is, if you've gotten the critical temperature right and all that stuff, that steel is as hard as it's going to get. So you could drop it on the floor, you can hit it, and it'll shatter, it'll break, it'll crack. You do not want to leave it that way. So don't quench your steel and then I'll temper it tomorrow sometime. You don't want to do that. You want to do it right away because that steel is under a tremendous amount of stress just after you quench it. It's like glass, really, and it's under stress. So you want to temper it right away. And there's different ways of doing that. One of them is, like for this piece, for example, you start heating with a MAP gas torch or propane torch or whatever. You can heat this end of it, take your time, and just let the heat work its way out here. Keep heating it here. Let the heat work its way out here, and you'll see temper colors. And this one, for example, is like a dark straw.
Yeah.
And,
Gordon, I've got some we've got a couple of questions.
Okay.
So we've got one from Daryl.
All right.
Just so anyone's interested in what it looks like, this is the package that my 01 steel came in. It's got all the composition listed on it and everything. And it's flat ground stock, right? And it's easy to work with a hacksaw and a file, and that's how it comes in a bar like this. So just in case anybody's curious what it looks like right from the shop. Great. I find this is easier than using old stuff because it's predictable.
Right. Yeah, that was my point. Buy new steel. It's already annealed. And I'm sorry I didn't have an example for you. So thanks, Daryl. I appreciate that.
And I've also got a question from Richard Berry.
Hi, Gordon.
Hi, Richard.
What are your thoughts on using used motor oil? I've heard good reports on using used motor oil as a tempering medium.
You can. It's not recommended because used motor oil has heavy metals in it from the bearings and engines. That smoke that comes off is extremely toxic. So you could, yes, you can. But I use clean canola oil. It just smells like French fries.
All right. Because what I'd heard was the benefit for using the used motor oil is that the high carbon content in the motor oil actually aids in the hardening of the steel, but I don't know how true that is.
I've not heard that. I just wouldn't because of the toxicity.
Gotcha.
Yeah, it used to be recommended in old books, but modern thinking is that you should avoid it because it's very harmful.
Yeah.
And I have actually done it, and the smell it makes is absolutely horrible.
Yeah. I mean, you can do it and it does work. I can't deny that. I just wouldn't recommend it because canola oil is cheaper than motor oil. And well, used oil is free, obviously, but it's got a lot of toxins in it. So that's the only reason I would say don't. Definitely, if you do, I would do that outside with the wind at your back.
So we were tempering.
We just hardened our 01 and now we're going to temper right away. I was going to show my original forge. This is the first forge I ever had. It's a tin can with a pipe stuck in the end, and this is all plaster. And I did some hardening and tempering in this. You just use a regular propane torch and stuff it in there, and the flame goes in there and swirls around. And this is the kind of thing you can use for hardening before the quench. Tempering, some people, like I said, use the torch method, but that can be a little bit if you want the whole thing, the whole tool the same, for example, the best thing to do is use your oven in your kitchen. Your oven will definitely provide the right temperatures for tempering. Anything you need from the hottest to the coolest temperatures in between. I'm going to share my screen here for a second. So let's see. So these are temper colors.
We don't have the image.
Those pictures aren't coming up yet, Gordon. You need
It's
to
not
click on
come up yet.
or you need to select them first.
Uh,
If you've clicked on it and you can see it, then it's not coming up on our screen.
Right.
Maybe depends on how you've shared it. That's better.
That's it. Thank you.
So these are colors of tempering. And basically what this is oxidation. And the oxidation will put these colors on your steel. You have to have it, nice and smooth and polished to be able to see these colors. Like when you quench, your steel's going to be black with soot and stuff from the oil. You want to clean all that off and polish whatever part you're going to temper so that these colors will come out. That chisel that I was showing you earlier was about this color right here. That's 400 Fahrenheit. No idea what that is in Celsius offhand, but that would be
It's about 200.
about 200. Okay.
Am I right in saying, Gordon, that the further to the left you go, the softer it is, and the further to the right you go, the harder it is? So when you get up to the blue parts up there, that's harder. So
No, just the opposite. It's just the opposite. Over here on the end is quenched. So this here is, I'll talk about normalizing later, but this is what it looks like when it's quenched, as hard as it can be. And then when you put it in the oven, say for 400 degrees, 200 C, it'll go to this temperature, and that will ease back the hardness a little bit. The farther, the higher the temperature, the more it will actually soften the steel. And when you get to about this point here, this color, it's back to where it was before you quenched it. So, for example, you guys have seen saw plates that are blue. That's that blue temper color. So they temper the saw plates to that about 590, which is I don't know, 300 C maybe. I'm guessing. So these colors are actually very accurate. Pretty much the same. Because it's like a thermometer almost. Whereas you put steel in the forge and heat it up and it turns red hot, for example. Some people can say, well, I know that color is 1500 degrees or whatever, but it depends on the ambient light in the room. If you turn the lights off, what you think is cherry red is really like orange, which is hotter. And with the lights on, what you think is black heat, you turn the lights off and it's still glowing cherry red. So I don't use those colors as a gauge. I should have talked about this when I was heat treating. The critical temperature, some people judge the color, and you really can't do that. That's why I use the magnetic method to find the critical temperature before quenching, because it's right on the money. It's different for all the tool steels. It's close in temperature. It's not there. There's not a huge range, but you can measure that piece of steel with a magnet at whatever heat it is and get your critical temperature just right.
Is that why a lot of blacksmith shops are kind of dark and like with roofs over the top of them so they can see the temperatures easier?
Right.
And I'm sure they didn't use
Yes.
magnets like hundreds of years ago, but if it was dark in that, they could then judge the cherry red through to the orange colours a lot easier because it was a darker shop. Whereas I've seen people using forges outside and using maybe like charcoal fires and stuff like that outside, and it's so much harder to judge the colour because of the light from the sun. And in a dark atmosphere, you can see the colours much better rather than when outside.
That's
What I do is I use the charcoal method, but it's like when the sun's gone down, so it's before it gets dark, but so like twilight.
Okay, I've got a couple more questions, Gordon.
Okay.
So John has been on a little while, but you were in mid-flow, so I didn't want to
Should I
interrupt you.
sharing?
John?
Am I on?
Yes.
Okay. My only comment was back to the engine oil, and I can explain why the old system and now we don't use it. Because many years ago in college, I took metallurgy classes and I took hardening. The difference was back then we were using non-detergent engine oil. Today, almost all the oils have detergents in them. That's part of what Gordon brought out. And also most of are at least semi part are synthetic oils. So in theory, if you could find, like I have availability here because of marine companies, I can buy pure engine oil that has no additives and it's not synthetic. Possibly you can do that wherever you're at, but I would, knowing what Gordon brought up is a fact, because we were talking about that. You don't want any additives at all. You just want the pure oil. And I think he's right. Canola oil is probably quick, faster, and easier to come by.
And it's cheap. Yep. Yeah, the detergent part of the oil, motor oil, is a little off topic, but the detergent part actually is to pick up dirt. When there's detergents in the oil, it'll pick up the dirt so it can flow through the system and get caught in the engine oil filter. Where like old lawnmowers that don't have filters on them, you use non-detergent oil. But, okay.
Okay, and I had Will Graham had a question as well.
Okay.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, good. When you're doing the magnet test, is there any particular type of magnet or, because all the magnets I know are small, right? And you don't want to get your hands anywhere close to that. Do you have some kind of
Right.
apparatus?
That's a good question. I don't use rare earth magnets, neodymium magnets. I just use regular old magnets.
All right.
And I found one with a hole on it, and I put a string on it, and I just have it hanging there. And you'll probably want to put a handle on it or something so that you can hold it away from the hot steel, because you don't want to burn your hand. Just any of the, like, the black rubberized, the old style magnets would be fine.
I've used one of the rare earth ones and literally just stuck it on the end of a crappy screwdriver
Yeah,
and touched it, and that did seem to work.
you can use a rare earth magnet. I just choose not to. They're plated, and usually it's like like my favorite screwdriver, and I don't want to melt that thing, and you know what I mean?
Sure.
So,
As I said, it was a
They're,
duffel.
they're a little more expensive too.
Yeah.
I had another question is, I don't want to get a forge or, because my shop is in the basement and not in my house. Okay. It's just not going to happen.
yeah.
Someday when I relocate, maybe I can set a place outside of the building that can be done as for that kind of stuff, but I'm not all that keen on it. But I've seen these induction coils that can take metal up to like the size of a chisel blade, right? Up to these glowing temperatures. Would that be a good way for somebody who didn't want to?
Absolutely. And I wish I had one. The induction forges are, I think, for the home shop guys. I don't know how long they've been around, but for home shop use, they're starting to come down in price, and people are buying them and using them. Basically what it is a big coil of copper wire, and you stick your tool right through the copper wire and just hold it there, and the induction forge will heat that section of your steel, and you can either forge it or use it for heat treating or whatever. And there's no fire, there's no exhaust fumes, there's nothing. It's
I
a
would imagine you have to be careful if you've got a pacemaker fitted.
okay.
Okay,
I don't
I'm
have one
just
yet.
neither do
Yeah,
I.
but just I'm thinking there's probably a magnetic thing going on there.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
big. So that's okay. Okay, that's good because
Yeah.
that was an option I was thinking about because I'm trying to work on chisel blades, but I don't want to forge.
Oh, that'd be perfect for it. It'd be
Okay.
perfect. If you're just hardening and tempering too, I mean, that'd be great. I wish I had one. Maybe I'll get one.
I don't want to ruin your talk by talking about something you're going to speak about. That's the kind of hard thing about doing these questions partway through, Gordon. But End and I were talking this week in a chat, and if you wanted a controlled temper where you want one end to be almost annealed and you want the other end to be hardened, and you want those straw through blue colours to be obviously running down the actual blade, let's call it a chisel, and we'll use and I'm not sure you're going to talk about your socket chisels. Your socket chisels, you might want the socket end to be annealed or as soft as possible. Is the way you said, using a torch from that end and just running it along till you see that the colours running up the blade? Is that the best way to do that? Because if
Yes.
you do it in an oven, then the whole thing then becomes hardened to a certain extent. So then your socket part of it's hardened rather than it being differential and harden one end and soften the other.
There's a couple ways to do that. Just like I described with the torch, heat. Well, a socket chisel, for example, there's only tool steel on the edge. The rest of it's mild, so it doesn't matter. But this is all tool steel, and like I said, you can heat this end with a torch and slowly work your way this way until you start seeing those temper colors.
Yeah.
And that's how I did this one. If you go too fast, you're gonna get too much heat, and then you'll go right through the rainbow here until you get to the edge. Maybe you don't want that. Maybe you want this whole thing yellow, so you can grind it back and use the chisel all the way back to here, and it'll be the same hardness.
But that's softer on your right hand side, our left hand side. So it's softer at that. It's softer at that end and it's hard at the other end. So it's got a differential hardness to it because you're only heating it from one end along the way.
Right.
Whereas if you done that in an oven, it would be uniform the whole way through.
Yep.
So-
Or yeah, go ahead.
So I was just gonna follow up on that is, so to get fully annealed or part of it like a chisel blade, I'm talking about the back part, to soften it up, to get it fully annealed so you can work on it. You would just get that end up to the glow and then just let it cool on its own for
I was going to talk about annealing a little bit later, but yeah,
Oh, okay. I'll
there's
wait.
a technique, and I'll go through that.
Okay.
To answer your question, Scott, the other way to do this is temper this in the oven. Maybe temper it to yellow all the way across, and then you'll know, like for this example, that all of this is yellow. But if you wanted this soft, you can always put a torch on this and anneal it just this side that way.
That would make sense. You
That's
don't really want that in.
another
If
way
it's
to
going to be
do it.
something, if it's going to be something you strike, you don't really want that being brittle or hard.
Yeah,
You want that to be softer metal on that end, and you want your harder, slightly more brittle stuff on the other end. So
That's
if you were
right.
to do that at all,
Yep.
I'm not saying a socket chisel takes a strike with a hammer because obviously you're going to put a wooden shaft in there, but it is going to take a lot more absorption of any force. And the softer that is, the better it absorbs that force going through it, and then your hardened end. The other way that I done it, and I'm not saying you've seen this, is to have a block of steel that's been heated in the forge, if the forge is big enough, and you take it out and then you sit it on it so that the chisel sits over the edge, and then you see the colour, so it's heating the chisel up from the soft end, and you see the colours running up onto it, and as soon as the colours run up the blade, you take it off, and then it just that's it set. The same way as that you're doing with a torch, you're heating up the soft end, so it's bringing it up to that temperature, and the colours straw through blue run up the hardened part of it.
Yep. That's a third way that I forgot about, but yeah, that's a blacksmith way to do it. Not necessarily the way I do it, but that is a valid, definitely. You get a big mass of hot steel, big block of steel heated up, and you lay your blade on it, and the heat will transfer into your hardened steel to get your temper colors.
Yep.
One thing I forgot to mention was when you are doing this, using the torch method or whatever, your colors are going to run this way, and they're going to keep on coming. You might overdo it. So when it turns yellow, for example, like this, you can dunk it right in water, cool it off, and that stops the temper right where you want it.
Another way that I've seen as well, and it's mostly blacksmiths I've seen doing this, is that they either wrap it in a wet cloth on the end that they don't want the colours to run up to. So they then use a torch, and that way you're controlling the hardened end by having a wet cloth on it. It will not heat as quick, and the wet cloth kind of stops the temper colours running all the way up to the very, very tip. So by wrapping it in a wet cloth, you can then heat it with a torch, and I think it's quite easy with a torch for it to run right up to the end too fast. So then you lose that hardness, as much of the hardness up towards the tip of it.
Another
So
way to
I've talked to
control.
some of the things to talk about. Sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
No, it's just I'm saying I'm sorry if you were going to talk about these things and you haven't spoken about them yet.
No, it's good to touch on them now. For example, if you're making a knife, sometimes people use differential hardening, which means your edge is hard, but the spine is soft, so that the blade won't break. So what they do is they harden the whole thing, temper it, and when they go to temper it, they'll temper it to where they want it, but then put this part in the vise. So the vise is a heat sink, and then just heat the spine here to a blue or whatever, and that'll soften it while the edges still at, stay yellow or whatever you tempered it at. If that makes sense.
Thanks.
I
Just to bring you back to where you were running through the colours. So you had the slide up with the different colours for the temperatures.
yeah.
I'm not saying that'll bring you back to where you were.
We
Yep.
were talking, I was talking, I kind of got off track where I was talking about temper colors, and then I mentioned the orange and red in the forge. These are two different things. They put them on the same chart, but these are the colors up here from slight red, very slight up to yellow. Those are the colors that the steel will glow when you heat them, red hot, or so to say. That's completely different than the temper colors, and that's all I wanted to say about that. The temper colors are the oxidation, like I mentioned before, and those are much lower temperatures. And these temper colors are very accurate. These other colors, it all depends on the ambient light in your shop, and I wouldn't gauge the temperature using the color because it's too deceiving. There's too much variability. Use the magnet. Works for me every time. And one more thing I forgot about hardening. When you're bringing your tool steel up to that critical temperature, you want to get it up to the critical temperature just a little bit above. You don't want to keep going and make it too hot. If you overheat the steel, you're going to get a bad, and you quench it, it's not going to be ideal. And I can show you a little bit about grain structure. Green. Oh, I gotta stop.
Yeah, Gordon was still seeing the small ones. Go
Yeah.
again. Yeah, that's great.
So this steel here is from a large drill bit that I made some examples for grain structure. So when you harden your steel, you quench it, it's as hard as it can get. So this is where this steel is right now. It's as hard as it possibly can get. And the way I made these pieces, I snapped them off. And there's three examples here. This example right here is what the grain looks like when it's overheated. So I heated this thing way, way too hot, and then I quenched it. And as you can see, the grain structure is just really coarse and rough, and that would not make a good edge tool. It would crack. It would grain structure. The finer the grain structure, the finer your edge will be. And for example, the second one here in the middle, this one, I heated it to critical temperature, right on the money, and I quenched it, and it's somewhere in between this and this, which is horrible. It's still a little grainy. It's okay, but you can do better. And the way you do better is called normalizing. When you forge a piece, I'm going to talk about that in the next section. I'm sorry if I'm confusing you. You don't have to worry about this with new steel. This is just forged steel, but I wanted to talk about the overheating your new tool steel. If you make a plane iron or something, you don't want to overheat it. And I'll get back to that in a little bit. But Temper right away.
Before you go on, is one of the reasons I was reading about just recently, and I went and done a little bit more research, even though I've been in a kind of forging class in the past. The hotter it gets, it loses more carbon.
Yes,
So there's an
that's
option
what I
in
was talking about, overheating.
Yep. The carbon molecules within the steel actually come out of the steel and oxidize and disappear. So the less carbon that's in it, then it'll be brittle and hard, but it won't retain an edge as good. The more carbon that's in that, the better it is.
Yep, decarburation, I think they call it. So, you know, I was at tempering. So if you're making a knife or a plane blade, something that's going to cut wood or whatever, you probably want to temper to in the range of like yellow or dark straw, kind of like that. If you're making something like a cold chisel, for example, or something that's going to take impact, you're going to want to temper that back a lot farther or it'll shatter. So blue, brown to blue, on that chart that I had up earlier. And you can do that right in your oven, and the oven works great. I use my oven for tempering and japanning. I never cook anything in it. But so that's new steel. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about heat treating and forging recycled steel. Junk you find on the side of the road, stuff that people give you, old files. There's different steels available in recycled stuff, and like 5160 is a spring steel. Leaf springs in your car, coil springs, any kind of springs are usually 5160. 51 is a chrome steel, and 60 is the percentage of carbon, 0.6% carbon. So it's a medium carbon steel. So it doesn't get super hard, but when you temper it back, it'll spring. And those are great for making punches and chisels and stuff like that. Another chrome steel is 52100, which is ball bearing races. This is an old ball bearing. It's the outer race. When I take them apart, I do that cut there, and I put a screwdriver in here and twist it, and this will actually bend open, and all the balls and all the crap falls out of the middle, and you got a nice piece of steel here to use for knives, plane blades, whatever you want to do with it. This stuff is super hard. I didn't write down how much. There's a lot of more chrome in this than there is 5160, and you know, because of the bearings in there going around, they want this race to be really hard, want it to be tough and wear resistant. So the chrome does that. Of course, 1095 in files. Regular files that are made for cutting metal, rasps, probably woodworking rasps and stuff like that are a different steel, and I'm not sure exactly what they are, but they're not 1095. I just spent 2 days making a knife and it wouldn't harden out of a rasp. It was kind of disappointing, but a lot of those are case hardened or it's a lower carbon steel. So careful with the rasps, but your regular Nicholson files are good 1095 steel, and I've made lots of neat stuff with them. Believe it or not, old bed frames are made out of, well, the ones here are made out of recycled railroad tracks. And I saw a video on YouTube about it because I didn't believe it. And someone sent it to me. They're actually busting up old railroad tracks and heating them up and making bed frames. So I found a couple old bed frames and I gave it a try. Spark testing, which I should talk about. I spark tested it and it's medium to high carbon steel. So I was shocked. So I'll show you something I made out of a bed frame a little bit later.
If you
And
could
just
explain
regular-
a little bit more about spark testing.
Yeah, I have a graphic I can show. Let's see, hang on a second. Where is it? Bear with me.
It's okay.
Might as well talk about it right now.
Yeah.
Okay. So this is an example of spark testing. You can spark test any kind of steel. I use a bench grinder. And I just take a piece of steel that I'm testing and you just lightly touch it to the top of the wheel and you let the sparks fly out over like normally where you would stand. And you don't need to lay into it or anything like that. You just need a light touch, just enough that it makes sparks. And you'll see these streams of sparks that go like this in this picture. The two here that we want to look at are the low carbon and high carbon steel. Low carbon will have some, what do they call them? Streams.
Sparkless?
These little stars that you see here. A low carbon steel, mild steel will just have a few little of these stars. You put a high carbon steel on a bench grinder, it just looks fuzzy. The sparks look fuzzy. That's a sure way to know that it's high carbon steel. Do you know what it is from that? No. It's you just know that it has a lot of carbon in it. Could be 1095, could be 1085, could be the 52-100, the bearing race. They all spark about the same with lots of fuzzy sparks. This will just help you if you have a small bar or something, you don't know if it's mild steel or maybe it's tool steel, you don't know, you can spark test it using this method and it'll tell you pretty much what you got. It talks about malleable iron and gray iron and stuff that doesn't really apply to what we're doing. But wrought iron, maybe you'll run into wrought iron. It sparks just different than low carbon. Low carbon meaning mild steel. So that's really about it for that. I don't know if any of you have tried that, but it's a good method. Cheap and dirty, you just stick it on the grinder and see what the sparks tell you.
I think a good way to see that, Gordon, is just to try some mild steel in it, and then try some O1. The difference between steel and O1, the little sparky starry bits are much more numerous in O1 than they are in mild steel. Mild steel is hardly get anything at all. It's just like you're showing there in the pictures.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mild steel, I don't think I'll take I'll not harden the same. It won't stay hard. Mild steel's not got enough carbon in it, I don't think, to remain hard or to create an edge good enough for woodworking, I don't think.
Right. That's exactly right. Yeah, just use some known steel and try them all and see the differences that you get. An old file, just grind just a little bit on the tang and you won't damage the file, but you'll see the sparks or like an old punch or something, you'll see the difference between the low, medium carbon, high carbon steels. And then if you have something you don't know, you can spark it and say, well, that looks like what my punch did. And so it's like a medium carbon. Okay, so
Okay, thank you, Go.
when you're recycling steel, you need to anneal it. When you're buying new steel, like I said before, it comes annealed already. And basically the process is you heat it up to that critical temperature we talked about before, and you want it to cool as slow as you possibly can get it to cool. I use gray wood ash just out of the fireplace. I sift all the black coals out of it, and it just leaves the gray ash. I got a big bucket full of it, and I'll heat up a piece of steel, a file, whatever, and I'll stuff it right in there and leave it overnight. And what that does is that keeps it from cooling off too fast. And the longer you take to cool it off, the softer it'll be, or more annealed, as far the closer it'll be to as soft as it can be, if that makes sense. If you just take it out of the fire and set it on the table or whatever, it's going to anneal a little bit, but not what you need. I found out like 01 steel, which is very forgiving, but if you heat it in the forge and set it on the anvil and let it cool, it will actually air harden.
Yeah, it loves to harden.
Yeah, and not as hard as it would if you quenched it, but it'll harden enough that you'll have trouble drilling through it, and you could snap it in half or whatever. So you definitely want to anneal anything that you're working on first if you're going to be drilling, filing, and all that. Vermiculite is another one that people use. They put your steel inside of that. Another way is just if you got a bonfire out back, throw your files in there or whatever, and just have a nice big fire, and then wait till that burns down, and the next day pull your files out and they'll be annealed.
Will they not be completely cooked?
No. You don't, unless you're blowing air into it, it's not going to get hot enough to cook it. It'll get them hot enough, and like in the coals, you want to bury them in the coals.
So would that work if I got my barbecue and you have a good, barbecue, and then after everybody's done it, just throw them into the bottom where all the ash is?
If there's enough, it might work.
Okay.
Does it matter what you're serving?
Lamb's rather greasy, so it might oil harden.
Yeah. Another way to do it is I have a big forge, so if I can heat a file up in there and turn the gas off and close the front up and just let it cool down, and that does the same thing as putting it into the wood ash. It takes forever for that thing to cool off, like a day. So that's the way I do it most of the time. It's just that's another method. Forging tool steel. If you're going to get into forging, when you forge tool steel, it has to be hot, as in the red to orange range, or yellow. When you're pounding on it, of course, it's putting a lot of stress in the steel and that. And if you try to forge it when it cools off to like black heat, for example, you can keep forging it, but what it does is it stresses the steel, and it'll actually crack, and it might crack right when you're hammering on it, or there might be little cracks in there to where you quench it later and it'll just break in half. So you always got to forge it hot, orange to yellow, and a little bit red, but you're getting into the danger zone when it gets down to red and black heat. But orange is
Sorry, Gordon. I know it's a little bit more specialised, but that last forging day that I went on, I bought myself a bit of stainless steel, and that was a mistake. I don't know why, but it wasn't really that expensive, and I took a bar with me and I sat it in the forge. It took so long for it to come up to any colour whatsoever, and once it was up to any sort of colour, I took it out and tried hammering on it, and it hardly moved at all. I pounded on that thing with a big hammer for I don't know how long, and it hardly moved. And then obviously then it cooled down, so you stick it back in the forge, and it took so long to come back up. I think I've got a bar somewhere that's kind of semi-squished and hammered on, and I never managed to make anything out of it because it was only one day. But stainless steel's obviously, you've not spoken about that at all, but it's totally different, I think. Have you had any experience using that at all? No.
No. Stainless steel, the regular like 304, 316 doesn't really harden the same as tool steel. I don't mess with it because it's not useful for what I'm doing. I wouldn't make a chisel out of it or a knife or anything like that. There are high carbon stainless steels like 440 series, but I don't play with that stuff, so I don't know a lot about it.
I don't want to go off topic, sorry.
No, that's okay. That's fine. Yeah, so when you're forging whatever you're making, once you get it shaped the way you want it and you're ready to harden and temper, what you have to do is normalize it. And what that means is you forged that, you beat the crap out of that piece of steel to shape it however you want it. And there's a lot of stresses in the steel that if you just go ahead and quench it at that time, it'll probably crack. Or it'll be prone to cracking later. So what you want to do is normalize. And normalizing is basically heat cycles. So you put it into your forge or use your torch or whatever you're using, bring it up to critical, and then pull that piece out and just let it cool on the workbench or anvil or whatever. And you do that 2 or 3 times. I always do it 3 times. It's free. So and what that does is that aligns all the grain and brings it back, makes the grain nice and fine. And I'm gonna go back to that picture that if I can. This picture here. Now I'll talk about what I did here. This is all the same piece of steel. This one here, I overheated it on purpose and quenched it. And it made a horrible looking rough grain. This one here, I brought it up to critical temperature and quenched it like you would normally do with brand new steel. But this has all been forged out. I forged these pieces out from a drill bit. So the grain here isn't quite so perfect. This one here, you can see the grain is nice and fine. That's exactly the way you want it. And the way I did that was I normalized it. Heat it up to critical, pull it out, let it cool off to black heat, put it back into critical again, let it cool off. Do that 3 times and then quench it. Bring it up to critical and then quench it on the 4th one. And that'll refine this grain to what you see here, which is optimal. So I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, I've heard of people heating it up and having it on sort of like a soak. So holding it there for a certain amount of time.
Yeah. If you're doing something real small, you don't necessarily have to do that. But if you're something larger, like a chisel or whatever, yeah, soaking just means let it sit at the critical temperature for a little while. So the heat goes all the way through the steel. It's not just the outside. It goes all the way to the inside. And you get more uniformity that way. That is it. That's all I got for you. I can show you some, I'm going to show some stuff that I've made. Here's you guys know these concrete drill bits? I picked them up for dirt cheap and I make tools out of them.
Oh, the it's known as the roll bit, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, you turn it as you're hitting it, and it's
Yeah.
pretty much torture. So everybody throws these things away, and good steel. So I talked about bed frames and making stuff out of bed frames. I made a shovel. This is for my garlic. When I harvest my garlic, I wanted a thin shovel that I could stick straight into the ground. It's nice and straight, and then get underneath the bulb and then pry it up. Most shovels are twice as wide and they're harder to push in and they're not quite as long. So that's a bed frame. And I forged this out. Um, I did some welding here, reinforcing and put the handle on, of course, but I hardened and tempered that and it chops through hard dirt like nothing.
And the saw edges for?
Cutting roots.
Yeah.
If you're cutting down through something other than harvesting garlic, if there's roots in there, these things will chop them right off.
Yeah.
So that's one homemade thing out of junk steel. Found a patent for a staple puller.
Okay.
Pulling staples out of fence posts. I got a friend with a horse. Always calls me. So I happened to see this. I'm like, I have to have one of those. So I made one. And I made this
Nice.
out of the cover photo for this talk shows a picture of my forge with a big round coil of a coil spring in it. That's
Yeah.
this piece right here. And basically it works like it's a wedge. You pound it into the staple and just when you pound it, it pulls the staple up. And that was a fun project, very useful. Made a draw knife from a file.
That is beautiful.
A thumb shave.
Yeah, it's a thumb shave. And that was a saw file, triangular saw file that I got from Isaac at Blackburn, actually. He gave me a whole box full of them. So, and man, that thing is sharp, let me tell you. I gotta be careful
Yeah.
with
You can see.
it. And if you guys know me, you're probably tired of seeing these, but I make kiridashis out of files.
I'm never tired of seeing those.
I even left the manufacturer's stamp on there just for fun. I do that when I can. 1095 steel, super sharp knife. I have two of them on my workbench and I use them all the time. This was brand new 01 steel. It's a scraper, blunt chisel, whatever you want to call it. And just like a 1 or 2 degree edge on there, and that's for smoothing off end grain. That was new steel.
Have you eased the edges on that,
On
or do you use the edges to scrape
these
different
edges
ways?
here,
Yeah, both sides. Yeah.
no, but I did a lot of grinding on it to smooth it out because it comes, they surface grind it.
Uh-huh.
Anton's asking if you could talk about your mark, how you came to have that, and maybe what you used to actually make the mark as well.
I haven't really decided what my official mark is going to be. I use a turkey track for a long time. I like it. So that's a turkey track, and what that is an etch. So what I do in a nutshell is I put paint on here, and then I take a pin or a pointy tool or whatever, and I'll draw in the paint the image, And then I'll do electro etching with little ice cube power supply and some salt water and a pad, and just rub it over the my artwork, I guess you call it. And then wipe the paint off, and that's what you get in the end.
Okay, I've got a question from Bob as well.
Hi, can you hear me all right? Yeah.
Yep.
I made this. Where are we?
Hang on, let me spotlight you, Bob.
Sorry.
I made that. Well, I don't know, a couple of years ago, really. A batch of chairs I'm making. Now that blade was 01 gauge plate,
Okay.
and I can't remember what I quenched it in, but I'm sure I quenched it in old oil, but it's cracked. I've used it, it's all right, but there's definitely a crack in it. And I tempered it. I tempered it on a block of metal that way up. I put it on top of a block of metal and watch the heat rising. And then I quenched it. I quenched it, as you see it, dropped it straight into oil. Now that's probably where I went wrong. But it works okay, but I've got a definite crack in it. I don't think you can see it.
Where's the crack?
I've got a job to see it. Just there, you can feel it with your fingernail. Where are we now? Just about there.
Okay.
I don't think you can see it. It's a surface crack.
Yeah.
But,
Maybe from bending it.
I bent it cold.
Okay.
I rough sharpened it, and then I heated it up, and then I tempered it. Now, where I live in Cheshire, North Cheshire and South Lancashire used to be a file making centre, and I still believe there are a couple of small file makers left. But I went to a talk one day, and I forgot it because it tickled me, and I listened to this guy talking, and he said he heard tales of one file maker in South Lancashire who would only quench a steel for a certain type of file, which I can't remember. They would only quench it in the urine of a pre-adolescent red-headed lad. And that tickled me. So I did meet a metallurgist one day, and he said, well, he'd heard of tempering stuff in urine. But this one, a red-headed lad, pre-adolescent red-headed lad, he would only quench it in the urine. And whether someone, I don't know, but it tickled me.
I've heard that.
You've heard it, yeah.
I don't know how it works, but I've heard that.
It tickled me.
I've heard of goat's urine being used as well.
Yeah, I know they used to use brine.
Yeah.
And still do to this day. Another tale I once bought a load, and I mean a load, of, I can't remember, it was M1 or M2 steel. And it's cheap. Anyway, when I got it home, I researched it, and I'll swear it had no tungsten in it. I thought it was
high-speed steel.
High-speed steel.
Yeah.
But it had no tungsten in it. It was cobalt.
Okay.
It had cobalt, some chrome, and something else. And when you come to harden it, it's actually heated for something like 24 hours. And then it was tempered in an oven for another 12 hours with hot air. So I passed that one on, sold it on again. Not one of my better buys, I'm afraid.
Yeah. That's why I recommended 01 steel. Simple hardening and tempering techniques. You know, you have to have expensive equipment.
The other thing
steels.
I always thought 01 steel was just pure carbon, but this stuff I bought, it had got manganese in it, bit of chrome, bit of vanadium, bit of all sorts.
Yep.
Yeah, it worked all right. Other than that crack. That's it for me. Okay.
Okay, and we've got so We've got Tom has got a question.
Hello.
Yep.
Hi. It was actually just a comment on the last thing about the urine, and why that sort of stayed, because it's a really old. I think a lot of people have come across it, but I believe the reason it's stayed as it sounds like an old faith thing that you put it in the urine of young redheads. I think it was young redheaded boys. But there is something about it. I think it goes back to the salt water, and it's to do with if you just put it in water, any hot iron in water, the water boils, evaporates, creates steam around the iron, and that actually slows the curing process. And the salts in urine stop that. And I don't know the physics or why that happens, and so it's an empirical thing that's been shown to actually be a good thing, which goes back to the salt water thing. So it's just why it actually has a basis in science and why it sort of came about. Well, we use oils now or steels designed for oils. Just wanted to comment that it's actually maybe not redheaded boys, but the urine bit is true. It has a bit. In fact, it cools faster because it doesn't generate the steam, which generates an insulation around it. And also, thank you to Gordon, because it's been a really interesting talk. Thank you.
Thanks for watching. Yeah, the salt water actually boils at a higher temperature. So if you think about it, quenching in water, hot steel and water is going to boil water around the steel that you're putting in to the water. And if it's salt water, it takes more heat to make it boil. So it actually makes the steel harder. They still use brine to this day. There's also, I should have mentioned, there's commercially available quenching oils that work much better than canola oil. I was able to get RC 55 out of 01 with my tempering files that I used to check the hardness, and you can do better than that with like Parks 50. But for the home shop guy, I wasn't really going to talk about much of that, because who's going to, get into
Sure.
expensive oil. But
We've got a question from Dennis in the chat as well. Do different steels oxidize differently so they could be identified by the rust on them?
Not really, no.
Yeah.
Hardened steel doesn't rust as readily as like mild steel or iron, but I wouldn't use that as a gauge as to what it is. Spark test would be better.
And we have a question from Steve.
Where does wrought iron fit in your scheme of things?
Wrought iron is a the primitive version of today's modern mild steel, which is sort of it's a go-to steel for just building things. Wrought iron does not harden. Mild steel doesn't harden. Wrought iron is basically, it's the manufacturing process, and that's why it's grainy. If you have an example here, if you make something out of it, it has a nice grain to it. But it's what can I say? It's the earlier version of mild steel. It was cheaper back in the day than tool steel. That's why you see wrought iron chisels, for example. The sockets are wrought iron, and then they weld a small piece of tool steel on the end, because tool steel was very expensive back in those days. Where today they make the whole chisel out of the same tool steel and just harden the end.
Well, one of the experiments that I did back in the 1980s was we took wrought iron chisels with cast steel edges. And we dropped a weight on it and to see how far it would penetrate the wood. And then we took a modern day chisel and did the same thing. We found the wrought iron chisels drive the edge of the steel deeper into the wood because the wrought iron is giving your force a direction conduit. So it delivers more of the force to the edge of the steel that you're going to be chopping out or whatever. And the modern day steels, when you hit them, some of the forces go off to the side because the alignment of the iron is not as controlled as you get with wrought iron versus modern, say, a 01 or something like that.
It doesn't have the grain structure that wrought iron does.
And that's the reason
Like
why
wood, really.
the old tools work better than the modern tools. But the difference is like 5 or 10%. So you just hit it a couple extra times and you still accomplish the same goal.
Yeah. And they don't make wrought iron anymore.
Or you can still buy it. I mean, you can make it.
Use it.
Hold steel on top of itself.
Yep.
I'm done.
So I'll go on with the show and tell. I just got a few more things here. This is a for the chip breaker screw on my planes. This is a piece of 5160 that I hardened and tempered, and it makes a great screwdriver. Much tougher than a mild steel bit. This won't get any dings in it or anything like that.
So are the sides parallel or tapered?
You mean here?
No, on the edge that goes into the slot.
It's tapered. I tapered them, but it fits all the way to the bottom and fits tight. I made it so it fits tight in the screw. It doesn't wiggle at all. It just sort of snaps in and go with it. Chisel. This is an amalgamation of new and old steel. I don't know. I got this 01 steel from scrap from Union Manufacturing. Rob sent me a whole bunch of scrap 01 and said make something. So I made a bunch of these chisels, and so it's new 01 steel, but it's used or discarded, and 3/32 chisel, hard to find. I don't even know if I've never seen one, so I made one, and Sean's got one, and he likes it. Made this marking knife out of a file. Nice hard steel. This is the 1095. That's my daily user. And I have a Stanley 48. I bought the Stanley 48. Kind of have it. Didn't have any irons in it. So I made irons out of this was a ball bearing race. So this is 52-100 steel, super hard, super tough. And those irons cut like butter. No logo on those. But, brought the plane back to life. It was a fun project, and I didn't have to buy irons for it. And another thing I make are flint strikers. Start and fire. This was a file, piece of a file. See if I can make some sparks here. See that? Yeah. And then I have a couple more that I made out of W1 steel. So it's a simple water hardening steel, and They make lots of sparks. Those are, that was new steel. This was recycled steel. Files work just fine for that. And that is the end of my presentation. That's all I got. So thanks for watching.
Well, thank you very much, Gordon.
Unless there's more questions, of course.
Anton's asked, did you, in the chat, did you ever laminate irons like old plain irons with wrought iron?
No, I have not. No. Thanks, Mitch.
Well, I think we need to raise a toast to Gordon. Thanks for a lovely presentation. To absent friends on the bench, thinking of Andy and hoping that, you know, he gets well soon, and that Jim is also doing well.
All right.
Absent friends of the bench.
The bench. An absolute
Friends of the
friend.
bench.
Thanks, everybody.
Very nice presentation, Gordon.
Thanks, chat.